In my last video, the beginner leveling guide, I went over some early game healing options, which made me think about all the other great choices in the mid and end game that a lot of players might not know about or consider. So this time let me show you a more comprehensive guide that's all about healing. The first two obvious choices are life and shield drain. If you have a 10% life drain, for example, it means that 10% of all of your damage dealt gets converted into health. And the same is said for shield drain. For the most part, those stats can only appear on melee weapons. But for the Sororitas class, it can roll on combo weapons that have one ranged weapon and one melee weapon. In the early game, that stat won't be very high, but as your item level increases, so does the stat, and in endgame on level 90 items, you can see that it will be extremely high. And on every weapon type, we get HP on hit and crit. So for example, you can have an Ether Blade with HP on crit and HP on hit, and also shield and life drain. But on a bolt gun, for example, you can only get HP on crit and HP on hit, which makes melee weapons by far the superior choice, since they can get both types of healing. As a quick side note, this HP enchant can also be rolled on your belt slot items, and this one can be rolled on your armor. There are some other enchants that provide healing, like HP on kill and on executions, but it's the much weaker choice, since you actually have to kill enemies all the time to heal up, which becomes exceedingly harder on higher difficulties. So the HP on hit, crit and shield and life drain are just much better choices. Before I go over some alternative enchants, let me show you how you can maximize the healing from those enchants first. The obvious choice is to deal AoE damage instead of single target damage, since the more enemies you hit at once, the more triggers of HP on hit and crit you get. And the same applies to shield and life drain as well. Draining 10% of a 10,000 damage hit on a single target isn't as good as draining 10% of a 10,000 hit on 4 targets. And since single target damage doesn't deal more damage than AoE, even if you made a dedicated single target build, means that in terms of healing, you will always be better off with an AoE build. But there are some ways to get AoE damage on a single target build. You could use, for example, this Sun Doctrine, which makes you fire 3 rounds instead of 1. Another great way to get healing is the Heat Aura Doctrine. When enemies are in its range, you will trigger all of your HP on hit, crit and shield and life drain enchants. This will make any AoE focused build even stronger and provides great healing for any single target build. You just have to keep in mind that you have to be very close to enemies for it to work. The Psyker has its own built-in version, in form of a blessing. So if you wanted, you could have 2 fire auras active at the same time. And the Sororitas class has her own version as well, with the Burning Devotion skill. Besides those auras, another way to trigger a lot of healing is with persistent effects. For example, those 2 skills on the Heavy Flamer, or this skill on the Hand Flamer and Brazier, and this one on the Plasma Pistol and Brazier. Any of such effects that stay for a while and continuously deal damage are great to trigger on-hit effects like HP on hit and crit, and they are of course also great for shield and life drain. One of the best weapons for that is the Grav Gun. The Gravity Implosion stays for a while, so you can switch back to your primary weapon, and all of the hits from the Gravity Implosion AoE effect will trigger your enchants, like your shield and life drain. Here you can see that I'm using the Gravity Implosion, then I switch back to my primary weapon, which is a melee weapon with a shield drain enchant, and the persistent Gravity Implosion AoE damage triggers my shield and life drain enchant. Of course I could just keep using the Grav Gun and don't switch back to my melee weapon, and trigger the HP on crit enchant, and the HP on hit shards, and the suppression on hit shards. If you have a setup like this, you will have a perfect support weapon to heal up. And on a Psyker, you also have persistent effects, like the Inferno for example, that creates a column of fire for 20 seconds. Another way that I don't use too often is to skill into HP regeneration. There are some decent enchants, perks and passives, but you really have to stack it up to feel a noticeable difference. There is one way to get a lot of HP regeneration with very low investment. For this you have to apply as many vulnerabilities as possible. One way to do it is to use the Diverse Tactics perk, which allows you to apply the 2 vulnerability types of the damage you are not dealing. So if you are dealing physical damage, you can apply heat and warp vulnerability with this perk. And if you combine it with this passive for example, then you can apply all 3 vulnerability types with a physical weapon. Another way to do it would be to get an Ancient Armor of Shattering. Combine this now with a Signum that applies general vulnerabilities, so you will have 4 types now, each with 10 stacks. Then get this enchant on your Inoculator, so with up to 40 stacks times 9, you can have up to 360 HP regeneration from one target. Now combine that with the Heat Aura, and all of those vulnerability stacks will be applied on enemies around you, which can give you HP regeneration in the thousands. Of course you can also do it without a Heat Aura and use AoE skills, it's just not that effective. One of the strongest heals you can get, especially if you are using ranged weapons, is to combine Enrage tokens with this enchant on your belt items. You can have a max of 20 Enrage tokens, and you can increase that amount by 9 with this ancient main implant, which allows you to have up to 29 times 20 HP on hit. With Berserk tokens, you could get even more HP and HP regeneration, because the max amount of Berserk tokens are 100, but getting and maintaining high Berserk tokens is just a very annoying mechanic, and can work on some maps with some enemy types, but not on others. That's why I generally avoid playing with them. It's just much easier to get and maintain Enrage tokens, so I recommend you do the same. Another great healing source would be this enchant, which can also roll on ranged weapons. It provides a lot of healing, but you sacrifice one of the strongest enchants you can have, which is the relic one on your weapon. So I seldom play with this enchant. I might use a weapon like this as my secondary one, for the moments when I really need a high amount of healing. Let's go over the Inoculator now. There are a bunch of choices, but by far the strongest healing you can get is the Blood Balm. It heals you 20% HP per second for 20 seconds, which is insane. But it also comes at a high cost. It takes away 3 usage cost and increases your Inoculator cooldown by 20 seconds. So if you're using 1 or even 2 of them, your cooldown will be super high. Yes, there are some things to make the cooldown shorter, like this component or those passives, but I recommend that you're using this enchant instead. With that you can keep resetting your cooldown. Another great choice would be this one in the health tree. But Blood Balm doesn't only increase the cooldown, it also has a high cost, so you end up maybe with 2 to 3 Inoculator charges. Of course you can look out for those medical supply boxes, but you could also increase your capacity with this component. Or you can get this enchant to get Inoculator charges. But what I recommend is to use one of my favorite Psalm doctrines. This one gives you not only a great death protection, but it also gives you Inoculator charges. So if you're using this doctrine with Blood Balm together and you have a way to reset the cooldown, you will have one of the best combinations to boost your survivability. Lastly, there are of course also shards like this that gives you HP on hit and HP regeneration, this one that gives you suppression on hit, and those 2 Psalm codes, which can give you energy shield even if you're using a ranged weapon and cannot get a shield drain enchant on it. So guys, I hope I gave you some great ideas to maximize your healing potential. I'm sure that I forgot a few things, so if you have any great ideas, just let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see more content like this.